What's up guys? Before we get into today's review, I wanted to quickly tell you all that I've launched a new YouTube channel. It's called WTP Productions and it's all about Pokemon. Pokemon is probably the one thing I love more than animated shows from the late 90s and 2000s, so I'm pretty excited to start turning that passion into awesome videos. There's going to be reviews of the Pokemon games in the same style as my reviews on this channel, in-depth videos about Pokemon history, mysteries and unsolved questions, and even a podcast dedicated to reviewing every episode of the Pokemon anime. If any of this sounds interesting to you, I'd love if you checked out the channel and subscribed if you like what you see. I've taken up enough of your time though, so let's get stuck into what you're really here for. My name's Brandon and this is Cartoon Network Video Game History, a show where I take a look back on all of the video games based on Cartoon Network shows and retrospectively review them. Surprise, surprise, we're back with yet another Ben 10 review. Y'all thought I was joking when I said Cartoon Network really milked this cash cow dry. 4 of the last 5 games released by Cartoon Network have been based on Ben 10, with the single exception being the Secret Saturday's Beast of the Fifth Sun, which just so happened to be heavily based on the Ben 10 game formula. Today we're looking at Ben 10 Ultimate Alien Cosmic Destruction. It was released on October 5, 2010 for the PS3, Xbox 360, Nintendo Wii, PS2, PSP and Nintendo DS. If you owned a video game console in 2010, you were pretty much guaranteed to have a way to play this game. This was also the very first Cartoon Network game to be released on the PlayStation 3 after the Rise of Hex snubbed the platform for some reason. It also marks a return to the series' roots after Rise of Hex decided to utilise a 2D style. The console versions of Cosmic Destruction were developed by Papaya Studio, who you'll remember from Vilgax Attacks. That game made probably the most significant tweaks to the formula so far, so it'll be interesting to see how they iterate here. The DS version, on the other hand, was taken away from First Playable Productions for the very first time. Instead, it was developed by Kryptonite Games, who dealt almost exclusively in licensed games. As you might expect, D3 returned as the publisher. Despite 6 different versions of this game existing, only one of them had a proper Metascore. The Xbox 360 version received a 51 average, making it one of the worst reviewed Ben 10 games. Across the board, it received 4 out of 10 from The Guardian, a 3 out of 10 from PlayStation Lifestyle, and a 6 out of 10 from Nintendo World Report. Since pretty much all of the Ben 10 games have been exactly the same, I find it hard to believe this one could be much worse than any of the other entries. Let's slam that Omnitrix down yet again to see what Cosmic Destruction is all about. As I expected, Ben 10 Ultimate Alien Cosmic Destruction is mostly iterative. It will be extremely familiar if you've played the first 3 games, but it adds in enough new wrinkles to make it feel at least a little bit fresh. Cosmic Destruction is yet another 3D beat 'em up, but what I found was that the combat had changed quite a bit. To my surprise and enjoyment, Papaya Studio seemed to have taken a lot of inspiration from Batman Arkham Asylum, which was released just over a year earlier. In Cosmic Destruction, Square acts as your standard melee attack, delivering an array of punches and kicks. While previous titles controlled like beat 'em ups of yesteryear, here you'll be able to glide from enemy to enemy as you would in the Batman Arkham games, making elaborate and endless combos a possibility. In previous games, once you had dispatched an enemy, you had to clumsily run over to the next to keep going. Here, just like the Arkham games, you simply need to aim your analog stick at an enemy and press square to see your aliens spring towards them. This was a much needed addition to the series, and honestly, the combat here is the best it has ever felt. I praised other Ben 10 games for their combat, and I still stand by that. They were fun to play, even if they weren't exactly reinventing the wheel. This game is on a whole other level though. This is really the culmination of all the other games. Similarly, the simple countering system of the Arkham series has been ported over to this game too. When an enemy gets ready to attack, an icon will appear over their head. Simply press triangle when it shows up, and your alien will counter them. It doesn't work as well as any of the Arkham games, but it's still a successful implementation. Apart from including a free-flow combat system, there's also a brand new way to implement special attacks. Previously, all of your moves were just mapped to one of the face buttons, and you'd have to input a Mortal Kombat style combo to pull off cool special moves. Here, things work a little different. Holding down R2 and then pressing one of the 4 face buttons is how you use your special moves, and I found this to be the best combat system yet. It made stringing together unique combos so much easier compared to past games which were just button mashes. I liked that the other games had so many combos, but there was no way I was ever remembering more than 1 or maybe 2 sequences. Here you have 4 incredibly easy to use special moves that can be used on the fly during whatever situation you think they'll be utilised best. These special moves drain a blue meter, which stops you from just spamming the best attacks over and over again. Another change from the status quo is that you can choose your alien loadout for each level. This initially seems kinda cool, but I actually found it kinda pointless. There are roadblocks in each level that require specific aliens to move past, so if you just go in with a random crew, you're probably going to find yourself stuck. The game actually gives you a recommended loadout, which guarantees you'll have the correct aliens. You go into each level with 4 aliens, but only 3 aliens are ever required for puzzles, so I guess it's kinda nice that you give you that one choice. Still, it seems kinda silly to act like you have freedom over which loadout you bring, when in reality you're forced to bring 3 specific aliens every time. As has become the norm, you get 10 aliens to choose from, which are a mixture of familiar faces, while some others are making their video game debut. Also, as basically everybody probably predicted, an upgrade system is once again present. However, this time it's a little bit different. Instead of just gaining experience and then unlocking a combo for an alien once you filled a meter, here you gain numerical experience points that you can spend on whatever aliens you like in real time. I thought this was a nice addition, but I never actually felt like the experience points were doing anything. It's a case of a good idea being executed rather poorly. The first couple of Ben 10 games used a fixed camera angle, but when Papaya Studios took over in Vilgax Attacks, the camera became more dynamic. Unfortunately, they didn't think to give you control of the camera, and as a result it created a whole range of problems that all made the game so much worse to play. Thankfully, this time they had the smart idea to give you full control. It's a basic necessity, so I'm not going to praise them for it, but god did it make a whole lot of difference. Something that I will praise though is the instantaneous switching between aliens. Since Protector of Earth, it's felt like each game has slowly improved upon this feeling until now, where switching between aliens is literally instantaneous. This is by far the best feeling of switching aliens so far, and it's finally a worthy representation of the show. In previous games, it was so frustrating to see cutscenes where Ben would switch between a bunch of different forms on the fly, but for you, it was this cumbersome process that just slowed the game down. Here, you simply switch aliens with the flick of a stick, and bam, you're off and running. It's not a massive flashy addition, but again, it makes a whole lot of difference when you're playing. The amount of effort invested in the story has clearly increased dramatically compared to The Rise of Hex, which made the story an afterthought and turned cutscenes into static images of 2 PNGs talking to each other. Charlotte Fullerton has returned to write the story, and again, the actual story isn't anything incredible, even by Ben 10 standards. However, it's enjoyable enough, and the cutscenes in between levels are a nice reward for your efforts in the gameplay. Cutscenes can be seriously long. They're not quite Kojima length, but they're still a lot longer than you'd expect for this type of game. The post-level 2 cutscene in particular is a standout when it comes to this. There's also a Chris Farley SNL reference in the second level, which I got a kick out of.
On the other side.
I heard Vilgax lives in a van down by this river now.
Well, you'll have plenty of time to live in a van down by the river when you're living in a van down by the river.
The story is yet another globe-trotting adventure, so you'll be travelling to places like Rome, Tokyo, Paris, and China. You even get to have a boss battle on the Eiffel Tower, which is a really fun experience. As I've mentioned in previous reviews, these varied locations are very welcome as they provide fresh backdrops for levels where you're never really doing anything too different. Visually, the game looks the best out of any of the Ben 10 games by far, which was to be expected probably, especially because I played the PlayStation 3 version. Also to be expected is the fact that when judged against other PS3 games, it's nothing spectacular. It's definitely not terrible or anything, but at the end of the day, it mostly looks like a flashy PS2 game rather than a full leap to the next generation of consoles. I've been mostly positive so far, but Ben 10 Ultimate Alien Cosmic Destruction does have a number of issues worth addressing. My biggest issue with the game is that there's no difficulty. You will breeze through this thing from start to finish, rarely ever getting the feeling that you're being challenged by the AI. Some of the flaws of the combat in previous games gave them slight amounts of difficulty, but I found that the combat had been so fine-tuned here that everything was a breeze. I may have potentially found it so easy because I've been playing almost nothing but Ben 10 games for the past few months too. I'm sure that's helped me become a bona fide Ben 10 esports pro. The one tiny slice of challenge I found in the game were the shield enemies. These weren't difficult per se, but more so just completely infuriating to fight. You're forced to parry these enemies before being able to damage them, which is very basic in smaller fights, but when the game throws more than a handful of enemies at you, it becomes extremely tedious. With so many enemies attacking you at once, it was pure luck when it came to which enemy you'd counter. I so badly wanted to plow through these enemies with my cool combos, but instead the shield enemies dragged the combat to a crawl. I found that when I did die, the checkpointing could be pretty damn awful, particularly around some of the more tedious traversal sections. Trudging through a boring climbing or shimmying section only to accidentally fall into a pit was made all the more frustrating when you'd be forced to go back and replay a not insignificant amount of the level. My final issue was the boss battles. None of the Ben 10 games have really knocked this out of the park, but the boss battles were particularly bad here. I didn't enjoy any of the boss battles that the game threw at me, and there are a crap load of boss battles here. Most of them are just so clumsily designed, something that is emphasised by the game's final boss battle. Here you square off against the game's main antagonist in what can only be described as a drunk kaiju fight. The combat in the rest of the game is tight and flows nicely. In this supersized boss battle, you feel clumsy and unrefined. It's the absolute worst note to end the game on, especially because the entire game is spent hyping up how big of a threat he is.
No! No!
Also, almost every damn villain in this game is voiced by John DiMaggio. He just uses the same voice every single time, so it was extremely bizarre. The dude was credited as like 5 different villains in the credits. While I do have a number of issues with it, I think Ben 10 Ultimate Alien Cosmic Destruction is the best Ben 10 game yet. It feels like a culmination of all the other Ben 10 games. This is what it was all building towards. They've learned lessons from all of the previous attempts and arrived at something that is a genuine joy to play. The only major things missing now are some sort of challenge to be present for older players when it comes to difficulty, and boss battles that don't completely blow. I honestly cannot believe reviewers scored this game under a 5 out of 10. It's not a Game of the Year contender, but damn, a 3 out of 10 is absolute bottom tier, which I don't think is the case at all here. While this feels like a culmination of the Ben 10 games, there are still plenty of Ben 10 games to go. Next up on my review schedule, we have Johnny Test on the Nintendo DS and the much anticipated Cartoon Network Punch Time Explosion. But after that, we'll be looking at Ben 10 Galactic Racing, as well as Omniverse and Omniverse 2 in the coming months. I'm crossing my fingers that the Omniverse games can somehow continue the great trends that have been set so far.